people will take their seats, we'll start. It's about almost 6 o'clock by this watch and a minute after 6 by my phone. Welcome. I'm Lisa Radosevich-Craig. I'm Public Information Officer with the Northern Rockies Team 1, Mike Okachia's team. It's nice to see you all here today. Before we start, I'll just go over some health and safety. As you know, the door is right there that you came into. There's also a door if you come through the front and you can go out the back door there. Restrooms in the back of the room to my left. There's also water and Gatorade back there, and there's a whole variety of handouts and maps for your taking as well. So, we've got about an hour total for tonight's meeting. We're going to have the speakers all present. We're going to hold questions until after all of the speakers have given their talks, and then we'll have time for some questions, and then afterwards we'll have different people buy the various maps if you have questions specific to a specific fighter. So to let you just know what we're going to do, I'm going to go over the agenda. We're going to start with Jeff Mull, the Superintendent of Glacier National Park. Just raise your hand. Then Rob Davies, District Ranger of Hungry Forest North Fork Ranger District of the Flathead National Forest. Cheryl Bright's going to talk fire behavior and weather of Northern Rockies Team 1. And then Andy James, our Operations Planning Chief of Northern Rockies Team 1, will give an operational briefing on each of the fires. Then we'll have Hunter Bell, Structure Protection, Northern Rockies Team 1. And we'll end with Mike Okachia, our Incident Commander, speaking. So now we will start with Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff Mell, Superintendent. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I know there's a lot of interest in all of these fires, but particularly the ones in the park. And let me just start by again expressing our regret for the loss and for the public and private structures that have been lost in the Howe fire. That is something that we all feel, and so we just understand that loss. And again, I also want to echo that even for those of you who are here, that 24-hour period after that big blow up of the Howe fire, I expressed the fact that I was thankful there were no injuries or fatalities associated with it. And here we are almost 3 weeks later that I'm still thankful that there are no notable injuries or fatalities associated with any of these fires. It's been a difficult summer across the country, and I'm just thankful that we've gotten through where we've gotten to so far. It does feel like we're in the second half of the ball game, in the sense of, it feels like we're on a downward swing, but at the same time, we don't want to get lulled into thinking, we're seeing season-ending events coming up. We know from our history that we've got a ways to go on this, that, really it isn't, winter is going to finally closes our fire season out. Every fire in the park this year has been a suppression fire. We've had, we've had at least 4 to 5 lightning strikes that our initial attack was successful in putting out in that initial period, but certainly we've had a few fires now that have escaped that initial attack. I think Numa Ridge might have been one, certainly the Howe Ridge, and now the Boundary Fire that's up on the Canadian border. And so, with that extended attack, these longer fires, we brought in some teams to help manage that. So, these are challenging times in terms of our ability to manage wildfire. There's, needless to say, we're seeing longer, hotter, drier summers, and it really presses our ability to respond and manage all those fires. I think the big disadvantage we have here in Montana is that our fire season starts late relative to the rest of the country. And what that often means is that, when it comes to resources, our cupboard is half bare by the time we need them. And that's just the sort of unfortunate situation I think we're in here in Montana, is just resources. And we certainly felt that early on in the fire. So last Friday, we turned over the management of all these fires to the Northern Rockies Type 1 team. under the leadership of Mike Bocaccia, who's with us today. And they're going to spend a little bit of time talking about all the fires, but again, focusing on some of those that folks are most interested in, and answer some of your questions. So this afternoon, we announced that beginning this Friday, September 7th, we will be offering a limited shuttle and tour access on the west side of going to the Sun Road. So, last year was definitely a learning year, given sort of what the situation we have with the spray fire as that fire moved down into the flat areas with that cedar hemlock. We've researched, and this team's done a great job with some data analysis and looking at what the fire in that fuel type could be doing over the next few weeks. And so together we feel comfortable that allowing a limited and controlled kind of access to the west side of the going to the Sun Road is something that we can do. And so there has been a press release that's gone out. I'm not going to go through the details now, but if you have questions of what that looks like, we can look at that in the question and answer period. So fall is coming, or at least it feels like it's been coming for almost a month now, but I would say, we can't lose our enthusiasm for what the fire that we do have on the ground. The 2 fires in the park, still showing active behavior, and it's going to be important for us to not lose our focus on that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rob Davies to introduce himself and make a few comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. So welcome everybody. My name is Rob Davies. I'm the district ranger on Hungry Horse and Glacier View districts of the Flathead. And Jeff and I find ourselves in this situation quite often. We work together on fires. We share a lot of resources. We manage the rivers together. We also manage fires together. And I have to say the partnership that Flathead National Forest has with the park is very, very strong. And these kind of events keep it even stronger. Quickly, I'm going to go over a couple things on the Flathead. We were really fortunate with our 3 fires. We're feeling better, but like Jeff said, there's still fall weather ahead, and we're going to be watching these closely. Paola Ridge is up in the Middle Fork, and then Coal Ridge fire is in the North Fork, and Whale Butte fire is up in the North Fork. And we've talked a lot about values at risk. The Highway 2 corridor is very major interstate through east to west. We have BNSF Railroad, we have gas and utilities and electric up there. And in the North Fork, like in the Middle Fork, we have a lot of homeowners out in that area that the relationships we have with the homeowners is very critical. It's almost really a value at risk that we try to maintain. And we've had very good relationships up there, and we've talked to a lot of the homeowners. And I have to say, Bocaccia's team here, they've been here in this situation in 2015, a lot of the same team members. I feel really good about the strategy and this team. I feel like we're in good hands, and we're going down a good path. So I will be here to answer questions about Paola Ridge, Coal Creek, and Whale Butte after the meeting.
Thank you, Ron. Next we'll have Cheryl Bright talking weather and fire behavior.
Good evening, everyone. Cheryl Bright. I'm the fire behavior analyst for this team, and so I'm going to cover the weather for you and then just give you an idea of what's happening with the fire activity on all the fires. So the weather through Friday, we're starting to get into a warming and drying trend with not really any significant wind, just stuff following the terrain, going up the slopes or down the valleys. And then we're looking at on the weekend, it's going to get a little cooler, and there's a slight chance of rain. Slight is what I was told. But I want to talk to you about some things that are influencing the fire behavior from the weather. We have some stuff that is burning in the lower third of the slope. And what that means is that it's under what we call an inversion layer. So if you guys have seen the smoke kind of hanging low at the base of the mountains, that's our inversion layer. And the stuff that's burning under there, it's just creeping and smoldering. It might be putting up some smoke, you might see some little flame, but there's not a whole lot of activity when that's present. Up above that inversion layer is what we call a thermal belt. So a thermal belt will have a little bit more activity, and you'll probably see that on the mid slopes of where the fires are at. And that's just where that warmer air is sitting on top of the colder air, and the fire is able to breathe, and it's able to have that heat and have some more activity. And then as you move further up, then winds and stuff start mixing everything out, and so then you get more of the wind influence as you get up to the ridges. Another thing about this warming and drying trend, and we've been experiencing it a lot past few nights, clear nights, and then just solar heating on the fire. So as the sun comes out, sometimes the fire is starting to pick up and you might see smoke or flame like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, just because of that sun hitting on those fuels, especially the ones that are more exposed, like over in the Robert Burn area in the park. The stuff under the timber is a little bit slower to catch up on that, and that solar heating also helps break that inversion out so that the fire activity at those lower levels finally in the afternoon gets to get going. So we have all 5 fires up here on the screen. Just some general stuff fire activity wise. They're all pretty much burning in some kind of mixed conifer timber. And the primary driver of that is going to be your large dead and down fuels from that timber fuel type. So think of it as like logs on a campfire. That's what it's burning on. But these logs are very dry, so that's why the fire, even though it may rain or drizzle a little bit, is still chunking its way through the fire, and you're seeing fire activity even though it seems like it would just stop with the weather that we're having. So otherwise, we have steepness now on some of these places. So as the fire is like this, then it's just backing down the slope, and it's just kind of chunking its way through those logs, just like when you light your campfire and it's slowly burning down. When we have fire going up a steep slope, then sometimes you'll get an occasional tree torching because that fire is leaning over at an angle. And some of these trees have a lot of really dead limbs hanging down, and so they'll get up into that. And you might also see some black kind of lichen moss type stuff. It'll get into that, and it'll just kind of go, and we call it torching that tree out. So if you see that occasional torching in what we're reporting, then that's what we're describing, is that just really intermittent happening of a tree going on fire and seeing that. And then the other thing that has been a big factor in this fire is that the brush is green. It hasn't really been burning, but I'm sure as people have been driving around, they're seeing the fall colors and things turning yellow and red. And what that is that those fuels are starting to cure out. They're starting to dry. They still have moisture in them though. So what that's going to do for us is it's going to create more smoke. As those fuels, start to burn, because now they are drying out a little bit. It's kind of like when you put wet needles or wet leaves on a fire, you get more smoke. So that's what you're going to see in some of these fires, is just more smoke from that process of the fall foliage starting to cure out. And then the other thing is that brush right now on several of the fires is actually checking the fire up. It's holding the fire, just because it's green, it's holding moisture. Back to our campfire, it's just like putting a wet log on your fire, it'll burn through the dry logs, but once you put that wet one on there, it just kind of stops, and it takes some time for that to ever catch on fire. So that's the general dynamics of what we have going on all 5 of these fires. So now I'll go specifically through each of them. So the boundary fire. Fire activity has primarily been on the ground. They have had some of that torching that I was describing. They have some avalanche chutes, which are mostly have that green brush in them, that are holding the fire, and that's what is holding that spot on the northeast side. It's held by an avalanche chute, so that's keeping it from going further to the east. Now this fire, the winds are pretty strong, and depending on which direction they're going, east or west, in that drainage, is where the fire activity is going to be for the day. So if the winds are blowing east, then our west side has been really active. If the winds are coming from the west, then it's going to be active on the east side. So the Butte fire. This fire just has heat in the interior, so there is still heat. It's going to be creeping around. As it gets into some of that brush that's becoming more available, you may see some more smoke come out of this fire. But for the most part, there's not going to be a lot of fire activity, just some smoke here and there. The Coal Ridge fire is the same thing, some heat in the interior. This fire is very sheltered from the wind, and so something that'll be in addition to this one is any time that the wind is able to come from a direction in those drainages, that it can get up into that fire. That's going to increase some of that interior fire activity, and you may see some more smoke on those days come out of this fire. So Howe Ridge, start on the west over here. So yesterday there was burning operations. We got a really good, clean line on that. What has been going on over here is it's just been backing down the hill along that slope like I was describing, just kind of like cranking its way, munching along through those logs, occasionally torching some of that reprod. So yesterday we put some heat to it so that we could get that fire to clean up and get back in there and make it solid in that area. You still will see some movement south from this part because those logs are still going to burn, and they're continuous enough that it's just going to keep kind of munching its way down to the south. On the east side up here, we have a pretty interesting fuel type, one that I've only seen in this one area, and it's been mentioned, western hemlock and western red cedar, and it's in this little flat right here. So those are species that you find in wet areas, and that makes sense in this area because you're at the north end of a lake, and you have a drainage through there. It's flat, it's under the inversion, so it's not really able to dry out. But with that comes a challenge for us because these species, since they're in water areas, they're actually fairly shallow rooted. And then their duff layer, or their layer of litter underneath there, builds up pretty deep because it just doesn't get fire in there very often. So what we're seeing in that area is that the fire's just not going to move a whole lot. You will see smoke because it's burning deep in that duff and it's burning around those tree roots. And what that does as a challenge for us to get in there to put that fire out is that it burns around those roots and those trees can actually fall over green. So it's just not a place that we can put firefighters into because of that danger of those trees. We can go to Paola. So Paola is one that inversion and that thermal belt that I talked about really come into play. This part of the fire is typically under that inversion in the morning, and these two flanks are typically in that thermal belt. So depending on how much the moisture came up overnight, sometimes these will be active during the night, and so you'll see smoke and you'll see maybe even some movement at night. During the day, these are the most active parts on the north and on the south. And they're staying in the timber and they're just doing more of what I described, some of that occasional single tree torching, and they're just moving up the slope and down the slope, and they're just kind of chunking their way along. And they'll just continue to do that until they get down to something that they just can't chunk through anymore. And one of those things is right here on the south end, and there is a stand right there of dense trees, and that's checking up that fire so it won't go any further to the south this way. And it's that same concept of it's just holding moisture and it's not letting it move. So if you have any more questions, then I will be around and glad to answer them. Thanks.
Next we have Andy James on operations.
Good evening, everyone. Andy James, Operations Section Chief Trainee. So when we got here, about a week ago, one of the first things we really wanted to do was to get our personnel out on all 5 of these fires, get a good feel for the resources we had in place that the team was leaving behind, and then really take a good hard look at the fuels, weather, and topography. You guys all know that's what drives fires in this part of the country. So, we did a lot of intel and built our plan. Initially, it was a struggle for us to find resources. If you remember when these fires started, nationally we had fires going on all over the country, but in particular really heavy in California and Oregon. Since then, things have calmed down and we've been able to get all the resources in that we need, okay? So we really feel confident moving forward that we have the right complement of resources to continue to manage these 5 fires throughout our duration here. So, it took us a little bit to get off the ground and running, but right now we feel really confident in what we've got in the plan. So, start off on the boundary fire. One thing that we did was we got one of our own team divisions in yesterday, and we got him inserted here on the boundary fire. We had a guy, Mike Rice, who's been up there for a few days doing a really good job, but we wanted to get somebody that we know, somebody that we trust up there. Mike was timing out, and give him the opportunity to get some boots on the ground and get a fresh set of eyes on that, okay? Sometimes you can become complacent when you're looking at the same piece of ground. So a couple of areas of concern to our team is here on this northeast corner. You've got Boundary Creek right here, and we've got a spot across the north side of the Boundary Creek, and then one here on the south side of Boundary Creek. And what we don't want this fire doing is to move out and come across here, get across Boundary Creek, and then potentially make a run up into Canada. What we've been told is that the winds run really hard north-south, so if we were to push out, then there's really potential for it to move north. You can see here this dark area. This is the Kenau fire from 2017. I think it goes without saying that those folks in Canada are still pretty gun-shy and still nervous. You can tell there is a lot of green, there is a lot of unburned up above the boundary fire. So we want to be cognizant of Parks Canada, what their interest is, and we've been working with them on a daily basis, have really good lines of communication and coordination with them. Another area of concern here is the west end. It's kind of chunking around in a bowl, and we continue to put some buckets on that to kind of keep that stuff at bay. That's really a concern to Parks Canada, so we put some buckets on that this morning, and we also have a fire use module, a 10-person fire use module that is up here. They hike in every day along Boundary Creek Trail and get in there, monitor that fire. They have done a little work on the spot on the north side of Boundary Creek, and just going to continue to monitor that. It really hasn't moved much in the last few days, which is a good sign. But want to make sure that we don't lose focus here on Boundary. Next, we'll move to Butte. So Butte, probably of the fires that we have, probably looks like it's in the best shape. If you look here, we have control lines around 3 sides of it. And then here along Well Creek, as that fire backed down, we had crews spread out up and down the creek. We used some portable pumps, tied into the creek with some hose lays. We caught that, held it in place. Crews have been down here all day today, mopping this up here in Well Creek. There's a little heat on the east flank here in the saddle. We put 2 skidgins in there as well, thinking maybe a couple of days, and we'll have the Butte fire looking in fantastic shape, and it will be more of a monitor patrol type status. Next, we'll move into coal and the contingency operation. We've got a couple different things going on here. I'll touch base with Coal Ridge. That fire's been parked since we got here, which is a good sign. It's really it's inaccessible, as you can tell, not much access to it, but we continue to fly it every day with our air attack platform. Yesterday when they flew, they picked up a little bit of smoke here, kind of on the northeast corner. So we put one of our ops section chief and branch director in an aircraft, went up and flew it today, no concern. Some of those heavier fuels that Cheryl talked about, that's what it is, just a lot of smoke, no open flame, well within the line here. So the Coal Ridge looks really good. And then, this big piece of contingency line that we've been working on, that the previous team started and we completed, the only thing that we have left is to get those logs hauled out of Hay and Spruce Creek and get those processed. There's about 250 loads of logs, so it's a long-term process. We're pulling out about 20 to 25 loads a day. And talking with those folks today, it looks like we're probably 5 to 7 days out getting that project complete. Once that's done, then we'll work with Rob and the forest and reevaluate opening some of these areas up a little bit more. They were doing some mastication work down here on the lower end between 315 and 320. Got that all completed yesterday. We demoed the masticators. So this contingency piece is coming along really well. And one thing that our division soup did was, instead of having all those resources come into briefing every morning, we sent them out at 0600 every morning. They were out on the line and typically started between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Gives them a real jump on things. And it's it takes a while when you've got a lot of pieces of equipment in there. We've got skidders, we've got forwarders, we've got processors, dump trucks in there, so it's a really big, complex operation, but happy to say things have smoothed out and going well. Now moving on to Howe. As Cheryl mentioned over here on the inner road here in Alpha Charlie, had a really good day with that burnout operation. The fire continued to back down. We knew eventually that it was going to reach the road. Night before last, it did. So, we've been planning on this. We've got the Gila hot shots that are up on that section. And, we slowly just picked that fire up and we just progressed to the north, just tried to stay ahead of the activity. And then we got it to a point, about mid-range where we hung it up. We needed some favorable winds to be able to complete the operation. Once the wind switched back around from the north and the northeast, there's a little drainage here and a trail that you can't see. So we just went back in, tied into the existing black, brought it back out to the inner road, and then slowly brought it back down and connected that piece in the middle. Looked really good, and we've got Gila and a few engines that are back out there today. Once again, they just gonna mop that up, cool it down, hold it, keep it in place. And as Cheryl mentioned, we've got this little finger here that's moving down this ridge above Howe Creek. We're going to keep eyes on that, and we know that in probably a few days that's going to get close to the road, and we'll just do the same thing. We'll pick it up as it hits the road, and we'll progress south, and just try to stay slightly ahead of it. That's really the only option we've got. We've looked at trying to go direct in here, and it's not viable due to the fuel type, the snag hazards, and it's believe it or not, it's really wet in here. So the option for using equipment and trying to go that route is not open. Moving around here to the other side, up on this North Lake McDonald Road, one of the things that the park specifically asked us to do was to open this road into the Kelly Camp area. We spent a couple of days planning, talking with the park, figured out what was going to be the best way to go about accomplishing that mission. And, we came up with a really good plan, put a couple of falling modules in here. They went ahead, they worked with our safety, they worked with the local resource advisor. They flagged all the snags that were going to be cut, and then they went in and took a few days to get all those on the ground. And then, as you can imagine from the fire, there was a lot of timber that had fallen down across the road, a lot of stuff that was jackstrawed. So we brought in a really small excavator, rubber tracks, really minimal impact on the terrain, and we just picked that stuff up and moved it upslope out of the way so we can get access. Talked to the guys out there today. They finished that operation up around 2 o'clock this afternoon. So it will be open for access. We will talk with the park to figure out the best way to facilitate getting those folks in there. Moving around to Division Echo, Cheryl talked about this lower end here on the flats. It's really hazardous. It's really dangerous. So we want to limit, the people and the personnel that we put in there. This stuff on higher to the north, up above the going to the Sun Road. We're keeping eyes on that. It's really been parked, hasn't moved, but we understand if it does want to come down to the going to the Sun Road, we understand the impacts that can cause. So we're keeping eyes on that, and we're being vigilant. And then also, as you guys know, on the upper end of McDonald, there's a lot of structures. So we have hose lays, pumps, sprinklers, and the folks will go in there on a daily basis. They'll fire those pumps up, run those sprinklers, just to make sure everything's in operational order in the event that we have to initiate structure protection. And then finally, we'll move to Paola. So this has been one of the most active fires that we've seen. Yesterday, it kind of really showed the most activity that we've seen, had some single tree torching, and really moved, stuff here on the south end, really made a move kind of upslope and then laterally. So we ordered up a helicopter, put a few drops on it, cooled it off. Everything was good for the rest of the day. We did go up above this shaded fuel break that we cut above the tracks. We took the Helena hot shots. They went up here on Paola Ridge. And if this makes sense, we went a little bit more direct with an indirect piece of line. Just basically kind of a check line. If it did move down, that we could keep it higher up on the slope. There's a really steep cut bank right here above the tracks, and it'd be difficult to get equipment and personnel in there. So hopefully we don't have to use that, but we do have that in place. Then moving out here on the south end, closer towards Essex. We talked with the forest. This is an old burn unit here. We took a caterpillar. We cut a little piece of fire line in here, and we'll be prepared to maybe, if this does move out, we can burn this, and we'll have basically a catcher's mitt. Some place to stand and be able to be receptive and hold that fire as it moves down. We do have personnel that are working here in the Dickey Creek, just doing a recon, trying to assess if there's any opportunity, once again, maybe go a little more direct with the indirect piece of line there. That's really kind of a quick and dirty rundown for what we've been doing and kind of what we're going to do moving forward. Be here for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Good evening or afternoon or whatever you want to do here. My name is Hunter Bell. I'm a structure protection specialist for the team, and I think this is my 6th or 7th role this year throughout the country doing structure protection. So it's been a busy year for everybody, and we're doing good. Here on these fires, I've been concentrating mainly on the Paola and the Howe Ridge and the structures within the park and the structures down in Pinnacle and Dickey Creek and Essex. And I'll just start at the bottom end down there at the Paola fire. Those other two on each end, the Essex and the Pinnacle, aren't threatened at this time, but we're getting people in there to look at them, to assess what we might need to do. We're building plans. That's one of the things I'll talk about later. And then we've got a lot of hoses and pumps and dozer lines and sprinklers and all kinds of sprinklers and personnel working around the Dickey Creek area that some of you guys who live in that area have seen day in and day out. And like Andy said, we go in there and we test the lines every day. If it's a new crew, they have fresh eyes and they look at it also. They may think, well, no, the sprinkler doesn't work really good right here. We want to move it a little bit over here. Or this line is a little bit kinked. We'll move it over here. And they check that stuff every day down there. So that's a good thing. The community down there, I get the privilege of meeting some of you guys down there on the line. It's everybody else that is mainly here on the fire gets to work up into the fire and do the direct fire attack. and I get to come down and work with the community. So I really enjoy that component of it. In the Howe Ridge area, in the park, we're working with the park. They've got a great system in place already with a plan. Structure assessments are in place, so I'm not doing as much work there. We've concentrated on the north end of the lake, reaffirming what the previous teams have done in here, the first initial attack folks, and then the type 1 team, team 2, Pearson's out of the southwest. We were reaffirming what they did, and once again, testing, retesting, readjusting, changing, that kind of stuff every day. The other day we came out and tested something. We had a fuel leak in one of the pumps, and we corrected that when we came out the next morning, and it's back up and running again. On the last fire we were on, people were stealing the fuel tanks, so every morning we'd have to come out and figure that out. So we do that every morning just for that reason, so that we can be ready and if and when that fire comes around the corner. So most of the structures on the all the structures on the north end of the lake have been divided up into zones, so that when we talk on the radio, we need engine 342 to go to zone 7 and start the pumps. They understand fully and completely where that is, because a lot of the houses don't have addresses, and we have maps that we build with those zones in place, so we look at it that way. The other thing we had, and that was the Pearson's team started, was they had a flotilla, and they used some of the park concessionaire boats, and their plan was to come out, if the fire got to that point, come in from the lakeside and start the pumps on the shoreline and then get back out of there. So they had a good way to get in and out, because you know some of the roads are kind of congested, kind of overhanging brush, kind of that timber that we've been talking about tipping over a lot. So we want to do it as safely as possible. We can't commit people into places where it's not safe to put them, and that's true in structure protection as well as the rest of the fire. Some of the stuff I'm working on in conjunction with the guys in the park, some of the folks in Flathead County, the BNSF Railway down down in Dickey Creek and Essex. We're working together on building plans for the potential of a fire impacting those communities. We don't know where the next one's coming from, so it really doesn't matter what direction the fire's coming. It does matter, let me take that back. It does matter where the fire's coming from now, but down there they've had a fire coming from the north, and I've heard about that. They've had the sheep fire coming from the south, and now we have one coming from the west down in that part of the world. Up in the park, they had the fire coming from the west, or the northeast last year, the Sprague, and now it's coming from the west. So I build these plans not knowing where the fire's coming from, but thinking about where it is today, so that this time next year, if we're here, they can open this stuff up and come up with a plan and with some history to it. I've been in contact, of course, with the previous team, with the work they did, and then I've actually contacted the guy that was here last year, the structure protection specialist, Terry Trapp, and so I'm working to enhance his plan that he built last year, which is great, but we're updating it with new information. So that's some of the stuff we do. We're working closely with Burlington Northern down there. They've got a great, I don't know if you guys know that, they got like a 60,000 gallon 3-tank rail car system that they can just pull along if we need it, and was down there visiting with them today about how we might protect the community down there with that extra 60,000 gallons, or that avalanche shed that they have down there. Pretty neat structure, but we can't lose that, because that's a pretty big piece of commerce that's important to the country, a lot of jobs involved in that. So, I don't think I have anything else. I'll have time for plenty of questions. I would encourage everybody, my little bit here is to encourage everybody to make sure you have an address on your house. Something, those green and white plaques really help us identify places where we need to go, when we need to go. Sometimes you'll see down in the Dickey Creek area, the first team used paper plates, and that's all they had at the time as an incoming incident. They put big numbers, and we number structures just 1 through whatever, not knowing your address because you didn't have it up there. You might not have had it up there. So we're going through and confirming some of those right now, and then we'll hand this. So these products I'm building, by the way, the last one was a book about 1.5 inches thick with structures and maps and jump drives and all that stuff of located geo-reference, and I give those to the forest. The park will get one, the local fire departments will get one. Whoever wants one can, well, for the most part, can have one. There's no personal information on there. It's just where the structure locations are and the plans that we have in place to deal with that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's all I got. I don't have a general map to go on. I guess I should talk about the other 3 fires that we've got. We've got a bunch of other divisions that I'm in contact with on the 3 other fires, and they come to me with some questions every now and then. But basically, the fires are out of the structure areas, so we're concentrating on the stuff at Lake McDonald, the north end of the lake, and the stuff at Dickey Creek for the most part, where I keep running back and forth and back and forth and back and forth to. So nobody's been forgotten in that regard. It's just there's less to do up there, and there's a lot of values at risk at Lake McDonald for sure. There's historical stuff. And, you know, I'll end with this, and I said it last time on the last fire. It doesn't matter to me or the people working with me or on the fire line. It doesn't matter to us the value of the structure. It's somebody's personal property that's there. It's the railroad. It's your grandfather's cabin that you're trying to help maintain and visit, and it might be your primary home. But to me, it's a structure that's important to somebody, and so I try to push that into the people that are working with me. So just know that that's how we do things. Thanks.
All right, good evening, everyone. Mike Kovaci, Incident Commander, Northern Rockies, Team 1. So, as you heard from the members of my team, that's pretty much the situation we're dealing with out there. As you heard, we came in last week. We got a very good in-briefing from the Glacier National Park. Waterton Lakes is also involved in this. They didn't give us a specific briefing that first day, but they gave me some clear direction and a delegation of authority, and in the Flathead National Forest. So that's essentially who I'm working for, and I'm using my team to execute what we've been asked to do. What we were asked to do was come in here, take over for the Southwest Team 2, and then I won't hit all the values at risk by name, but you can see with these 5 fires, and you all know Glacier National Park, the Flathead National Forest, the Waterton Lakes National Park, there's a lot of special places and a lot of important things out there, and we were tasked with basically making sure we do everything we can to protect all those values at risk. So that's been our tasking, along with trying to secure where we safely could do so some of these edges of the fire to take away the threats to those values at risk. So starting up at the boundary, you heard operations talk that we've been in a very close coordination and communication with Parks Canada. Specifically, I talked to Scott Murphy, their FMO, daily on what's going on with the fire, and we make sure we're talking about today's plan, and then we're really looking out, what's the weather, what's things going to be doing a couple days from now, and is there anything we need to be concerned with? And as you heard, they're very nervous on that end from the fire they experienced last year that came in and around Waterton. We're focused on that east edge because their big fear is this thing makes a hard push to the east. Worst case, it jumps the lake to the east and continues to go to the east with the potential to wrap around back towards Waterton and basically hit him in the face, if you will. So daily coordination, daily talking, and I feel very comfortable and confident with what my operations folks are doing up there, and I feel the sense that they're comfortable and confident with the plan we have going on there. Whale Butte, Coal Ridge on the Flathead side, you heard those are looking very good, and I can attest. I drove out there today with my deputy, and we looked at both of those, and they're looking very good. There's still a lot of work to do out there, as you've heard. A lot of material was put in some shaded fuel breaks, and we need to move that material and get it out of the way so we can secure some areas that are in the grizzly bear core areas, and those roads will need to be closed once we get here into the fall. But a lot of work has been done, and it's going to continue to be done, and I can attest personally those look very good, and I'm feeling very good that we're not going to have to worry about those in any time in the near future. Coming down here to the biggest fire we're dealing with on Howe Ridge, you heard what operations is dealing with on that west side, and understanding everybody that was here in 2003. I know a lot of the folks on my team were here either up on the Wedge Canyon fire, or we watched the Alaskans when they came in down here at the Roberts fire and the work they had to do. But we're basically dealing with fire burning in that old fire scar. And if you can imagine the challenges operations is facing, a lot of that fuel loading is like waist deep jackstraw fuel. So it's essentially impossible to think that we can put any one of your kids or grandsons, granddaughters out there and do fire line like we normally would on a more open forest floor. As that backed in, as you heard Andy say, they're just slow and methodically bringing that fire to the edge where we can control it, secure it, mop it up, and then actually add some black lines to that map. So you'll start seeing that. But I'm sure somebody's going to ask the question of what are we doing with this big chunk down here, because you got some values at risk at Apgar and West Glacier. Well, we've had lots of discussions, and at the point we're in the season, you've heard weather talk, you've heard the discussion that we've dropped down nationally to a PL4, regionally to a PL3, meaning we can pretty much get any resource we would need at this time, unlike a couple weeks ago when it was really hard to get anything if we asked for it. So we're feeling like the best strategy is just to let this fire slowly do what it's doing through those fuels, and if needed, we will just keep up with it coming down that line, versus if we were in the middle of the summer, the conversation will be much different of like, hey, we better get the resources we need to get this secure right now, and we may have to actually add more black to get that secured to protect those values at risk. So that is the strategy we're looking at there. Slow and patience is what we've been preaching to our firefighters out there, and just doing what's necessary at that moment in time when it needs to be done. And then the last one, so I don't forget it, Paola Ridge. Myself personally, I was here with the Type 2 team in 2015 when we had the Thompson Divide complex, and then specifically the sheep fire that was coming down into Essex. Unfortunately, on that one, there was a moment when we actually had to evacuate Essex, and we're familiar and understand what that involves. Also fully am aware and understand the impacts to the railroad and all the folks that live around there when we have to give those recommendations to the Flathead County Sheriff. Right now, I'm feeling real good about what you heard operations say with what the weather we're looking at and the fire behavior, that there is not going to be any threat to those values anytime soon. Is the potential still there? Possibly, but we're prepared and we're ready to do what we need to do if we have to go there. Right now, though, things are looking good, and you heard those plans, and I was really glad that my operations folks looked for another alternative to see if they could get another. It's still indirect, but it's a little closer to the fire, just personally knowing what happens if I have to shut down the railroad, and who comes to town to talk to me specifically when that happens, along with my bosses here that brought us in. So we're working really hard to try and limit those impacts to all of you, and just from my team, most of the folks on my team are from the local area. Many folks are right down here in the Flathead Valley, Flathead National Forest, and so we feel it. I know we were in California when this started, so we're having to watch back home and hear from our families and loved ones of what's going on, and it's never fun to be on a out-of-town fire when you hear things going on back home, but that's just the nature of our business. But at the end, we're very glad it worked out that we could get to come here and at this time and go to work for Jeff and Chip and Rob and Mr. Fry, if he's back there. It's always good to have a home game, if you will, in our business versus being somewhere else. So we're all going to be around here. We have maps set up in the back to specifically speak to any questions you might have to a specific fire. I know we've kind of opened it up and hit all 5 fires, and realize that some of you may have a question for Boundary versus Howe and whatever, but I'll turn it over to the PIOs to do a few, and then we'll be around here as long as need be to answer specific questions to anything specific to one fire or another. So thank you for coming out tonight, and look forward to trying to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mike. Before we go into questions, I want to recognize a few people. So the Chief Ranger for Glacier National Park, Paul Austin, is here. You want to just raise your arm? And the Flathead County Emergency Manager, Rick Saka. From Senator Tester's office, Chad Campbell, back over here. And from Senator Dane's office, Danielle Tribble. Okay. We'll have time to ask probably 3-4 questions for the general group, and then we'll go into, like Mike said, break up. Besides the maps here, we have maps on the table and there's maps outside. Anyone in a yellow shirt or a black shirt, feel free to talk to along with the park and the forest. Miss in the green.
I'm gonna stand up.
Okay, and I do wanna say, we are taping this for Facebook so that your questions will be on.
This may be more specific to the Howe Ridge fire, but I think it does have some applicability to the other fires as well. The last gentleman talked about how hot or how difficult it was to fight this fire that was coming down Howe Ridge. And I remember the community of Kelly's Camp who lost a cabin there. I'm wondering, are we gonna be seeing, we hope to rebuild, I'm wondering, are we gonna be seeing a 15-year cycle like this where it starts to grow up again? This was from the Rogers fire from backburns, and Roberts fire from backburns. Are we gonna have to contend with this again? And what can be done about it to stop that cycle? Can anything be done?
So the question is on the cycle of fire and with what happened around Howe Ridge with the past fire and what's gonna happen in 15 years from now. Mike?
So that's a very good question. I guess I'll bring it into my own personal experiences. I grew up in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana. I was still in high school when 1988 occurred and a fire blew out the canyon above my folks' home, and been fighting fire in that valley ever since I got into this business. And it seems like we keep going back to the same place over and over again. And I think here's a really good testament to these old fire scars are still going to carry fire on these type of years where those fuels dry out. So the best advice I can give you, there's a lot of materials out there when you do rebuild to actually do the fuels treatments and look into that Firewise stuff. I think the North Fork is a good example of a Firewise community, and there's other examples around the country where you can look at that and do some of the treatments around your property to better prepare yourself. And the other piece to this, it's new technologies, but you can look into the materials that are more fire resistant as well. So it's really adjusting and adapting to what we're dealing with would be my recommendation.
Well, we've already been down to talk to Everlogs, who has concrete logs, that type of thing, but we also have to talk about, I think, to the Park Service, about how many trees we can cut, how much we can clear, being private, and we're going to have to get some relief because there was nothing that could stop that fire, unfortunately, when it got going.
Understand.
Another question, sir?
You know, with the earlier mention of fire season kind of starting late here, and thus less resources, I wonder if there's going to be a concerted effort by either the Forest or the Park Service to recruit or maybe assist seasonal employees like myself to be able to get red carded so we can be out there for whatever resource when other people are out in California, other places where the season starts earlier.
So the question, I don't know if the Forest Service wants to talk to the Park Service, is with their need for more and more firefighters, will the different agencies do more to help non-employees, or the ADs we call the militia, come and work?
Well, I guess I could say that, you know, I think we've made a concerted effort here at Glacier anyway to ramp up our in-house militia so that more of our staff, we've realized that, you know, we can't just rely on our fire staff to be that, you know, initial attack, and we don't need any of that other. And so I think we made a concerted effort to do that. Now, yeah, it does take some training, it does take some, you know, commitment, and, you know, I think, you know, we're working with our other programs to say, hey, this is important. And I gotta say, you know, adjusting to wildfire, how prominent is wildfire gonna be in our life? Well, I can tell you, you know, 3 out of 4 years now, we've had significant fire in Glacier National Park. Prior to that, kind of a long dry spell there. And so, you know, it's, yeah, so I can't speak for my predecessors, but some of them didn't have to deal with much fire, and there probably wasn't much incentive for them to really sort of, okay, I gotta have, you know, a pretty good sized militia. But certainly, you that's a focus of ours and will continue to be so. I think as we look back, and I've been told that, there are gonna be people looking at, what's going on here, that 3 of the last 4 years, we've had significant fires here in the park. And what does that mean for us? How should, programmatically, how do we look at that and recognize that, this is gonna be our future? How might we do things a lot differently than we do today? So I think that's gonna be a big question that we hope to look at, over the course of the winter and probably into the ongoing future.
Yeah, just real quick, I echo what Jeff said. The Forest Service, we are declining in our budget. We're kind of the steady downfall of personnel. But what you'll find on the Flathead, and you'll see it a lot for us, are really promoting militia, and we're promoting trainee positions. These team positions, it takes a lot of experience and skill. And there's a lot of trainees embedded into this team right here. So we're trying to carry that forward, that skill level to deal with this. So we're promoting it as much as we can.
Thank you. Mrs. will be our last question, and then we'll move on.
I believe the gentleman second, you said you were working on planning for future fires? I basically have a business in Apgar and I live in West Glacier, and I very profoundly remember the Roberts fire. And so what is your role if you're looking at what to do in this area, working on some plans for all of us here? What do we do when the fire comes from a different area? Because it will, I think.
Okay, so the question is, what can be done to help structure protection in this area when you're coming from different areas?
And in the planning I'm doing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other part of her question was the planning. So when people come to work for me in structure protection, engine people, task force leaders, crews, fire observers, those kind of people, on the last fire I gave every one of them, every engine, every squad on the crew, a box of crayons. It's blank paper. And I said, go into a community and tell me what you need, and draw the structures in, draw your hose lays out, do the pumpkins, those big orange things with water. Tell me what kind of pumps you need, what kind of sprinklers you need, if we need a dozer line around the back of that community, that kind of stuff. And then I take all that information and I put it in a packet. Their exact drawing that they made with some consultation. We go back and forth and like, well, what about this, what about that? And so they get some experience looking at that. There are a lot of people on these engines that have a lot of experience doing this kind of work, because this is what we do a lot on all these fires. It seems like it's some sort of structure protection. So I take that information and I put it in this big file, and I update addresses and structure locations to work with the county and build their map system, make it better, and say, yeah, there is a structure here. This is what it looks like. These are the tactical challenges with that structure. So we hand that off to the county and the park, and we were in Happy Camp. I gave it to the tribe down there. They had a fire team down there. So that kind of stuff is what I do and build that kind of stuff. Was there a question about?
Well, how would that be available? Would I go to the park or to the county to say, okay, the West Glacier community, we're concerned, and we're a small community here, where we could go to find out what the plan is?
So any of those places will have it. They'll have it on a jump drive. I can give you my contact information, and I can certainly give that to you at that point. It's not proprietary stuff. Like I said, I had Terry Traps from last year's, and I'm working on looking at those options and updating there. Here's an example. I went to Fort Davis, Texas, in May for the McDaniel fire. It was another wildland fire in a dry, 110 degrees, dry environment, same type of structures, a lot of technical challenges. And a friend of mine came from the Region 8 team, Randy Jones. He's on Buitte's team as the structure protection specialist. We know each other. Some people call us the little union, because we visit a lot and we communicate about what we want to do and the stuff we need, so we come up with a consistent package. But Randy shows up and I show up, and we go to work together, and he goes, Hunter, you're gonna love this. We were here 5 years ago, and I've got the plan that we had 5 years ago. So what did we do? We took that plan with the local fire department and the Texas Forest Service and the Nature Conservancy, which was right there, and we updated everything in it and handed it back off and left. And so they had an updated system that they could use continually, for the next couple of years. The mapping program that we use is available on Avenza Maps, so that you can follow the little blue dot, and it'll have all those structures on there. So when you go around, that's you'll be able to go, oh, this is structure 129 Maple. I know right how to get there. So that's the kind of stuff that we hand off, that kind of information.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
And I'd encourage people to look up Firewise Community, get together with the park and the forest and Firewise. And we'll break up and then people can come and ask their questions because it's been an hour. But I do want to ask, when would you like another
I want to
community
make a
meeting?
statement. I'm sorry, but there was one death caused by this fire. It would be remiss for us not to remember Doug Miller.
You're right.
I took him back from after he saw his home, and he was devastated, and he died the next day. So I just don't think we forget that.
So sorry.
I apologize.
Thank you for that remembrance. Just the question, when would you like another meeting? Anything? Okay. Well, when you feel like you want one, please let the park and the forest know and they will work with us.
We have 2 more questions, is that okay?
Okay, sure.
The question I've got, and I know I live in West Glacier full-time, and I hear this from a lot of our residents and people around, and I don't know who to address to of the specialists, and you guys and ladies, you know what you're doing. We keep repeatedly hearing that a lot of the fires that are burning so bad and hot are because the trees are being left in the forest and are like you're saying, like a campfire. Why can't those dead or dying or trees be removed? Because we all hike and we've seen pile upon pile of dead trees. Why can't those be removed to stop this?
So the question is, with the dead and down trees in the forest, what can be done to help remove them? Rob,
Well, I guess I think this gets the heart of the question of, the difference between, what happens in public lands and then, all the Forest Service lands versus the park lands. And, I've had this conversation with many folks from Congress, Secretaries of Interior and otherwise, what is that difference? And so national parks, because of the way Congress established, national parks are set aside for natural process, for natural conditions, ecosystems to continue on their own. And so, yes, generally after a fire, we don't do a logging operation in the aftermath of that. Now, should we be doing structure protection? Absolutely. Should we be good neighbors and cleaning up debris and other things around private lands and structures? Absolutely. But sort of wholesale logging, it really isn't sort of in the National Park Service. Now, I'm not going to say that, given if this is our new world, seeing what we're seeing today, across the country, will that change? I'm not going to say it won't. I mean, obviously, we're seeing a lot of fire in the landscape that needs to be addressed. But, it would have to go back to Congress to help make that decision that we're going to do something different in national parks. And of course, there'll be a lot of questions about sort of what's the character of a national park. So, Rob, you want to add that?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add real quick is national forests, like Jeff said, we have a lot of differences. We have land management areas within Flathead National Forest. A lot of that landscape here in the Flathead is either wilderness, roadless, where our ability to manage is not, we just don't have that by law, by our plan. So those areas, we allow natural processes just like the park does. It's only near an urban interface where we have cabins, communities. Those are the only opportunities on the Flathead where we have a chance to be proactive or come in afterwards and salvage logs and so forth. But it's a very limited area when you look at the entire Flathead National Forest.
Yeah, I guess I would, there's been some, Missoulian had a great article that came out a week and a half ago that talked about a plan or some studies that showed that, even with, you look at all the logging that takes place in the country now, it only represents 1 to 2% of what used to burn prehistorically. And that, historically, there was a lot of fire on the landscape. And so, even, to think that managing timber, managing our forest alone is going to take care of that situation is not the case. It certainly can address those issues in and around people live, but, on the broader landscape, I think the research is beginning to show that, we are way behind on how much should have burned from a prehistoric perspective.
And ma'am?
I live on North McDonald Road at Kelly Camp, and since the Robert fire in 2003, the people that live at Kelly Camp have had, everybody carries a chainsaw in their car, and we take down trees. I'm asking, when you're going in and clearing the road, can you possibly cut back the trees to keep them from falling on the road like they have? 4 years ago, we cut out 17 trees after a storm. We got to the ranger station and they had trees down, and we cut the ranger station at North McDonald Road. We got them out of their pickle, so to speak. So while you're doing road protection, can you cut those trees back, drop them uphill, drop them downhill, so they don't do that to that road and make it impossible to get out?
So the question is, for the people who live around Kelly Camp, thank you, and the roads where the trees typically will be falling down and they have to continuously cut them down, can more be done for that?
So I'll just touch base on that real quick. So to answer your question, yes, we went in and evaluated, I think several hundred trees that could potentially impact and come down and cross the road. Now that's not going to be 100%. There's no way that we can actually go in and ensure at some point there's not going to be a tree that doesn't go down and cross that. But from our perspective, it boils down to safety. All right. First and foremost, we have to make sure that we can get our personnel in there to operate safely, and then after that, we're really aware of everybody that's going to be coming in. And when you finally get access and get to come back in, we don't want you to have to worry about that. Okay, so that was part of the plan, to make sure that that road will stay as safe and as open as possible. But like I said, eventually something will come down, but initially it's going to be in really good shape.
Do you have a timeline on that?
That's been completed, and like I said, we'll talk with the park this evening in the morning and come up with a timeline and come up with an avenue to get folks in there and get access. That's something that's just a little above my pay grade, to be quite honest with you. But that was, from an operations standpoint, that was something that was really critical to me. I wanted to make sure that we got that taken care of and got that access opened up. Yes, ma'am.
Did I misunderstand? Did you say on the North McDonald Road, that trees that you did take out, you just pushed as far as you could?
What we did, the whole trees that we cut.
Is that going to be fire?
So what we did was we just cut the trees that had potential to come down, the snags, the standing dead trees, and some of those live cedars that basically look like they're on a tripod. We felled those, up slope if we could. If not, we felled them down slope, and then we went in and bucked them up. Then we brought the excavator in behind. He picked them up, set them up slope, perpendicular, so they wouldn't roll down, and that's what that's going to look like.
They are going to be there, but why are you taking them out at Fullbridge then?
Because our instructions, what we were directed to do was to leave that stuff in place now. That's going to be a conversation for later on. We were just charged with opening that road, and beyond that, we'll have to once again, talk with the park and see what they want to do moving forward.
I would like to suggest to the moderator, she asked about another meeting, and this is getting too long, but I think there's a lot of interest in how things are managed. And I would suggest if you have another meeting, it's great to go through the status of the fire, but a lot of us are more interested in the future now. And what can we do? And if, Jeff, you can't do something at your level, where can we go to, because I've been here 70 years, and I'm afraid at the rate we're going, that there's not gonna be any trees in this park. if we keep, you know, if you sit at Lake McDonald Hotel and look where our cabins were, it is a wasteland. It looks like Mount St. Helens.
It's Armageddon.
Yeah, it does, and I just, you know, I just don't know if there's anything we can do about it, but it's very depressing.
Well, I think that conversation is a good one, and again, I think it goes back to what does the future look like for us, and how are we going to work through this period of wildfire. I mean, it's you know, hotter, drier, longer summers. I mean, that's the trajectory we seem to be on, and so how do we work through that? I will just add on that our direction to this team for clearing Kelly Camp Road was to be very liberal and take down as much as they felt was safe to clear on the road. So that was our direction. So now, does that mean they're going to get everything? I don't know, but you know, that was our direction to them. And you know, I got to warn you though. I mean, there's an awful lot of trees that are going to come down, especially you know, right around the Kelly Camp area.
Well, we're prepared for that, but I am concerned that if they stay there.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that we're looking at is, you know, one of our big limitations is the bridge across McDonald. I mean, that's one of the big reasons why we can't have logging trucks come in and haul all that material out. We're going to have to come up with some other way that's either much more labor intensive, whether we chip it on site, maybe we bring, you know, do a sawmill and try to do what we can. Even we're talking about floating it out on the lake, you know. We recognize that all that material should not just sit there, but how we get it out is going to be, and it's not necessarily this team's job either, right? They're here to eliminate the hazard. So we are beginning our Bear Area recovery process that we are trying to roll in. What do we do with all this material that's on the ground and how do we get it out of there? So, yeah, we're working on that.
Is there been an assessment of the bridges? I heard that maybe the one over Kelly Creek might be a little bit burned. Has anybody looked at those yet for us getting in?
Well, as far as...
The question is an assessment of the bridges and are they safe?
So we have not had our road crew in there yet. So that's going to happen in the next day or two. But needless to say, the crews have been there. They've had to assess it for themselves. So.
Okay, well, thank you all. Thank you all for coming. People will be here to answer your questions, so feel free to come up, speak to any of these people here or any of the team members or people in yellow. Thank you so much.